Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Civil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, I hope you'll enjoy this live legal education content, and today may be the day I earn your subscription. For today's story, we are dealing with some wonderful news coming to the parents of Pennsylvania. Apparently, it's not enough that the kids be kept out of school and not allowed to learn and not be with friends, not be with their teachers in person, not have social interaction, which I'm sure will in no way impact them in either the short, medium, or long terms. No. It's not enough, my friend. The state of Pennsylvania has new and exciting information they would like to send them to further give you fear and further give them control. How fun and exciting. So, by way of just explanation, this letter has been sent out to multiple people we are aware of. We believe that we're the only channel that has a copy of this letter. Where multiple people have received the letter, but we think we're the only ones that have it. And multiple parents who've received it who, to the best of our understanding, have been in contact, or apologize, their kids. Their kids have been in contact with someone who has COVID, namely at school. So that's the context of this letter. This letter is being sent out to multiple parents of children who themselves have not necessarily had COVID or tested COVID for anything. No, they've just been in contact with someone who's been diagnosed with the COOF. And this is a letter that we're getting all that stuff. Great. So let's do that. This is a copy of the letter that has been sent out by the Great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to, again, multiple families. And this letter comes to us courtesy of one of the members of the channel, whose name, obviously, we will not mention for privacy reasons, but otherwise we have been able to authenticate it to our satisfaction. And this comes from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Notice regarding potential transmission of the COOF. The Secretary of Health is directing persons who attended, and then it gives a location of a particular school district, which again we have redacted for the sense of privacy. But it doesn't really matter now, does it, which specific school district? It only matters if you're the state of Pennsylvania, apologize, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and want to track down the people with the wrong thing. But we're not going to help. The Secretary of Health continues. COVID-19 is a threat to the public's health, for which the Secretary of Health may order general control measures. General control. Just what I love to hear from my government. This authority is granted to the Secretary of Health pursuant to law. See Section 5 of the Disease Prevention and Control Law and the Department of Health's regulations, which have the force of law but are not law, right? Because they weren't passed by the legislature, but they have the force of law. So, yeah. Particularly, the department has the authority to take any disease control measure appropriate to protect the public from the spread of an infectious disease. Well, that doesn't sound ominous or overbearing in any way. Any disease control measure to prevent the spread of disease. The department has the authority to direct any disease control measures in addition to isolation and quarantine. So isolation and quarantine are mere butt starters to the Department of Health. Thus, that the department considers to be appropriate for the surveillance of the disease when the disease control measure is necessary to protect the public from the spread of all infectious agents. I do love how we have multiple different language choices, which are not all at all comparable with each other or synonyms for each other. We talk about appropriate for surveillance and then necessary to protect the public. Are those two different things or are those the same thing? Normally, the words appropriate and necessary are kind of two different things. But what does the word necessary really mean when you're talking about the ability to spread disease? And for that matter, why would it stop with COVID? I mean, from its own logical terms. COVID is a disease that spreads and is dangerous, but not particularly when it comes to young people, who again are the target of this particular letter. Lest I remind you, this is going to school-age children who have potentially come into contact with COVID from being around those people at school. So, young people who are not known for having particularly high problems when it comes to COVID versus other people in the population. Also, one could make a reasonable case that the prevalence rate of young people when it comes to COVID and its severity rate when it comes to young people when it comes to COVID. Notice how I'm using my words very carefully here. When it comes to young people, when it comes to COVID, its severity and pervasiveness rate is at least comparable. And one could make the argument that it is potentially not as dangerous as other kinds of infectious diseases that may impact this age group. So that's a lot of qualifiers, but got to make the overlords happy at YouTube Land. Of course, also, as always, I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. You should consult your own doctor for medical advice, or Fauci, whichever is more convenient. Moving on. The department has the latitude and presumably longitude to determine the appropriate disease control measures based on the disease or infection, the patient's circumstances, and any other available information relating to the patient and the disease or infection. Now, again, I'd like to take note, as I mentioned before, we are aware that this letter has been received in its same form by multiple different parents. Why do I make this point of mentioning that? Because the Secretary of Health just told us just now that the nature of what they're supposed to do is supposed to be based on the patient. Remember? They just said it 5 seconds ago. That it's supposed to be based on the patient's circumstances and other information relating to the patient. Yet it's a form letter, which means it's not patient specific. That's okay. COVID-19 is a disease that's capable of rapidly spreading person to person. This is not necessarily disputed, but it's not clear that anything can really be done about that, particularly when it comes to the more spreadable or transmissible versions of COVID, which seem to be going around at this time. It's capable of rapidly spreading person to person. Persons infected are capable of exposing others to COVID-19, even if their symptoms are mild, such as cough, or even if they're asymptomatic. Yeah. Additionally, exposure is possible by touching a surface or object. Didn't we kind of dispute that long ago? That COVID-19 doesn't spread from surfaces? Again, it's generally a good idea to clean surfaces for disease protection in general, right? You don't want germs and viruses and bacteria, particularly when it comes to food prep. Got to make sure we don't get salmonella all over the place, for example. So keeping your surfaces clean is generally a good idea. But with COVID specifically, didn't we kind of debunk the idea that it spreads on surfaces long ago? Are we going back to wiping down our Amazon packages? Is that what we're doing now? I suppose if we have a broad enough definition of possible. But it's also possible the government of Pennsylvania is going to send me a cookie. Yet I am cookieless. I am sans cookie. Exposure is possible by touching a surface or object that has the virus on it, and then by touching one's mouth, nose, or eyes. Symptoms of COVID-19 may include fever, fatigue, congestion or runny nose, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and loss of smell. Other than loss of taste or smell, that sounds like every illness I've ever had in the history of time. Want a way to narrow that down a lot. Older adults and people who have serious chronic medical conditions are at higher rate. Well, that's true, and thank you for acknowledging it, but once again, we're sending this letter to the school children. So this fact, while interesting, does kind of belie its own existence. The person subject to so this is the authoritarian part, right? This is the authoritarian part of the memo. So up till now, we've just been informing you of stuff, but now they're going to demand things of you. They're going to use that police power, which states have and the federal government does not have, to mandate that you do things. Now, can they legally mandate you do these things? Most likely, yes. It's a totally different analysis when it comes to the state versus federal government. I've said this many times. Many, many times. This is coming from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Health, not from the Biden administration. Different analysis. So, can the state of Pennsylvania do this? Probably. Now, we could look into it and we could ask questions, for example, about whether or not the statutes allow for this and whether or not the regulations allow for this. But at least hypothetically, that's possible. I do see I have a $100 super chat from Kathy Carver. Thank you very much for your super chat. Your donation is extremely appreciated. So it's possible that the relevant state law or relevant state regulations do not allow for this. And we have seen that be true before. In our coverage, we've seen that be true before. $9.99 from Stephen Light. Thank you for bringing this. You're welcome, Stephen. We've seen that before. We've seen that. I think it was state of Michigan, although it's hard to tell because we've covered so many of these things at this point. Maybe it was Wisconsin. It was one of them. Anyway, where the relevant state authority that was purporting to do stuff did not have the authority in its statutes. Wasn't there. So this could be that situation. I don't know. We'd have to actually get into the deep dive of Pennsylvania law. But we are asking different questions than we were with Biden. So it's important to keep these things straight as we're being good legal educators. So Pennsylvania could theoretically have the power. Whether or not they've actually given themselves the power, or whether or not the people issuing these memorandum have the power that they're purporting to have, is a whole separate question. But for the sake of analysis for the rest of this letter, we'll assume that they do. But that may or may not be true. Please consult your relevant state guidelines for a more direct commentary. Okay, so here's anyways what they're ordering you to do. The persons subject to this order are directed to, that would be compelled, to take the following disease control measures for 14 days following the date of their last attendance at the gathering. The gathering in this question was going to school. And 14 days? 14 days to stop the spread? Seems like just yesterday, doesn't it? What things does the state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania require me to do? I'm so glad I asked. Number one, take your temperature once daily. I'm taking my temperature right now. My temperature is irked. Watch for other symptoms of COVID-19, including a fever, a body temperature of 38 degrees Celsius or higher, cough, shortness of breath, shakes, chills, muscle pain, headache, sore throat, fatigue, congestion or runny nose, diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, and or loss of smell. I do not see on this list a sense of rage, palpable anger, or the feeling like I'm constantly going to have a stroke. So I guess those are not symptoms of the COVID, so that's good news. So I don't have the COVID. Immediately report any symptoms regarding the medical condition to the department if they develop. See the number below and contact your healthcare provider, but make sure to tell them you might have been exposed to COVID-19 because there's no way that they would know that. There's no way they would know that. $20 from Stephen C. Always appreciate your brains on other channels. Light speed is constant. Ha ha ha. It surely is. Yeah, I appreciate that they say when I contact my healthcare provider, it's really important that I tell them that I might have been exposed to COVID because my healthcare provider doesn't know that. You see, it's really important that I share that information with my healthcare provider because they don't know that. They don't know that I might have been exposed to the COVID. There's no way for them to know without me telling them that I might have been exposed to the COVID. So it's really, really important when I contact my health provider to mention, hey, by the way, I might have been exposed to COVID because there's no way for them to know that other than by me telling them. Because my healthcare provider is apparently an idiot. Okie doke. What else am I supposed to do? Wear a mask and maintain social distancing of at least 6 feet. Are we still doing the 6 feet thing? And also the masks. What kind of masks? because some of the masks do F all. Some of the masks, YouTube, some of them do F all. YouTube, the efficacy of the masks is somewhat an issue that might be of some interest, YouTube, and some of them don't really particularly help, it seems, with some of the variants of COVID. Is it misinformation if I'm just repeating what the CDC says? Let's find out. What else am I supposed to do? Practice the following hygiene measures. Wash your hands often with soap or water for at least 20 seconds. Generally good advice. Use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer if soap and water are not available. Cover any coughs or sneezes with your elbow. Do not use your hands. And clean surfaces frequently, including countertops, light switches, cell phones, and other frequently touched items. Again, this does not seem to be COVID specific. Also, who cleans their cell phone? Does anyone regularly clean their cell phone? Am I missing out on a cleaning routine? I'm supposed to clean my cell phone? Who does this? And why are we doing this with respect to COVID? Because COVID doesn't spread from services. I thought we debunked that long ago. Scott McClish says, HIPAA law says no one can ask you any medical information. That is wrong, my friend, Scott. HIPAA law says no one can ask about any medical information. That's wrong, Scott. But this is a good opportunity to clear up. HIPAA and you. HIPAA and you. HIPAA and you. Let's talk about HIPAA and you. HIPAA and you. All right. So let's talk about the Health Insurance Patient Portability Act, better known as HIPAA. What is HIPAA? I'm so glad you asked. HIPAA deals with patient portability of records, and it requires that covered entities, and that's actually a pretty important part of this law, covered entities are required to keep your health information protected. What is a covered entity? Well, I'll give you some examples. They're actually spelled out in the statute explicitly. But covered entities include such things as your doctor, your hospital, your health insurer, and other things that are like that are in the general trade. So if you want to know what a protected entity is, just think someone that's in the regular business of healthcare, and you're probably there. That's a covered entity. Well, what does HIPAA not cover? Anyone who's not a covered entity, right? HIPAA doesn't cover medical information if you're not a covered entity. HIPAA has nothing to say about covered entity. It has nothing to say about non-covered entities. For example, yours truly. If by some method, through some lawful method, so I didn't steal it, but if through some lawful method I came into your possession of your health information and I decided to share it all over the internet, HIPAA has nothing to say about that. Now, note carefully what I just said. Listen to the words like a lawyer. HIPAA has nothing to say about that, right? There may be other issues that are being exposed, but HIPAA is not one of them, because HIPAA does not cover me because I am not a covered entity, because I am not in the regular business of providing healthcare. So if I come into contact with your medical information and I decided to share it to literally anyone that pleases me, HIPAA has nothing to say to me. Okay, so HIPAA is not going to help. Who else does HIPAA not apply to? Well, most critically, you. HIPAA doesn't apply to you. Right? You can share your medical information with literally anyone you want. You are not a covered entity when it comes to your own medical information. Amazing. The First Amendment does not bar you from sharing literally anything about your own medical information that you want with literally anybody. It's totally cool. Go nuts. You know who else is not covered by HIPAA? Like literally anyone else who's not a covered entity who wants to just ask you for it. Who could be like a non-covered entity who might want to ask you about your medical records? How about the bar you're walking into, or the movie theater, or the school, or or any random business? Hey, do you have your COVID card? You can't ask that question because of HIPAA. Wrong, 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 wrong. First of all, yes, I can. Second of all, you can tell me because you're not covered by HIPAA. Third of all, I can exclude you for not telling me, so go away. So HIPAA is not, and then on top of all this stuff, HIPAA has exclusions. HIPAA has exceptions, like every law pretty much written in the history of time. HIPAA does not cover everything. What things does HIPAA not cover? I'm so glad you asked. Would you be surprised to learn that HIPAA does not, for example, protect medical privacy information when it comes to, for example, particularly virulent spreadable diseases? It doesn't. It's right in the statute. So not only can your doctor reveal that information to the state authority, they have to provide that information to the state authority. HIPAA does not protect that for particularly infectious diseases, which are designated usually by the Department of Health of the respective states, which, as you might anticipate, have said COVID is a particularly spreadable disease. So when your doctor calls up the Department of Health and says, hey, they've got the COVID, or when they send out the letter and say, hey, you've got the COVID, does HIPAA apply? Nope. Because HIPAA itself says it doesn't. HIPAA is not the all-knowing magic bullet when it comes to health privacy. I'm sorry to tell you, Blake, but most laws, it's more complicated than that. So please do not believe that HIPAA provides you all the protection ever. It does not provide all the protection. It doesn't apply to the business you're going to. It doesn't apply to anyone who wants to see your COVID card. It doesn't apply to you showing your COVID card. It doesn't apply to them sharing the information because they're not a covered entity. And even if it did, it wouldn't cover them because it's a particularly infectious disease. So HIPAA doesn't apply. So, read the statute more carefully next time, I guess. Oh man, I'm having way too much fun with this. Anyways, pressing on. Rant is funny until people die. I don't know what to tell you, man. Yeah, also not covered by HIPAA, for example, are threats. Basically anything that a doctor would learn that poses an imminent threat to others. So it's not just infectious diseases, by the way. It also doesn't cover, for example, mental patients. It doesn't cover mental health treatment if the mental health provider has a reasonable belief that the mental health patient poses an imminent threat to themselves or others, right? And if you've ever gone to a mental health provider, they will tell you this up front in their privacy practices, if you've ever read them, which I know you don't. Next time you go to a doctor's office and they have you sign the 8,000 pieces of paperwork, why don't you take the time and actually read the privacy policy, which I know none of you have ever read ever. I have. I read it so you don't have to. But it will say explicitly in there that they have the authority to tell the police and other government entities if you pose a threat to yourself or others, whether that's mental health or physical health. And that once again, not only can they have to. It's called a Tarasoff letter in the case of mental health. See Tarasoff versus Regents of University of California for that one, right? So if you go to a doctor's office or a mental health office and you say, I have a desire to hurt somebody right now, or I am currently hurting someone, or I'm committing domestic abuse right now, or I'm committing abuse of children right now, or other things. You ever heard of the mandatory reporter? You know who mandatory reporters are? Doctors. You know why they can be mandatory reporters? HIPAA doesn't cover it. Pressing on. Be aware of persons in your home who may be particularly likely to get COVID, including those who are elderly or those who are immunocompromised, for example. Someone who has cancer and is taking chemotherapy, or may have been exposed to other illness like diabetes or asthma. Be careful to practice social distancing around these persons. Again, probably generally good advice, but I'm not sure specifically why we're telling it to, again, the kids who are in the school. If you or members of your family develop symptoms of COVID, which are all the things, except for the symptoms I currently have, which are, a sense of bile in my throat and a continuing sense that I'm going to have a stroke from the stupid. But those, fortunately, are not symptoms of the COVID. But if you have any other symptoms that are like normal, you should notify the Department of Health at this wonderful phone number. And you should also contact your healthcare provider. Before seeking medical attention for yourself or your family, you should also tell the healthcare provider that you've been exposed to COVID because, they wouldn't know that otherwise because they're brain dead. I just have to say this. If you're going to a doctor and you say something like, I think I might have been exposed to COVID, and your doctor says, really, I hadn't considered that possibility, you might want a different doctor. So, just a suggestion. Persons subject to this directive, which are the parents of children who do not have themselves COVID, nor the kids, these are just kids who know someone who does, shall immediately adhere to this directive, and all disease control measures included within it. Persons who fail to do so are subject to fine under the Act. The department is concerned about the health and well-being of you and your family and the general public. We understand this is a difficult time and some individuals may need additional support. Please feel free to reach out to us at this phone number. I need assistance with the stupid. Can the Department of Health help with that? I don't know, man. That might be too much even for the Department of Health to help with the stupid. But yeah, that brings us to the end of this letter. So, the worst thing you could do as a parent at this point would be to test your kid for COVID. Right? I mean, why would you? Why would you? First of all, unless, they have particularly strong symptoms, I guess, then, But they're going to do that at the hospital anyway. But why would you go out of your way to test them for COVID? Because you see, here's the thing. If you don't know, you can't report it. And I've often commented about this before to medical health providers who some of them have never considered this concept, right? I've asked them, for example, at law conferences or something where we have some interaction, or just, when I'm talking to doctors, just out in the world. And I'm like, let me ask you a question about these mandatory consent laws. Do you support them? It's like, yeah. Well, how can you report something you don't know? And they ask you, well, what do you mean? I say, okay, let's suppose I'm a rational individual. Let's suppose I'm a rational individual and a well-informed individual. And let's assume that I know that if I tell you that I have a desire to do things that are problematic, that you'll report me to the relevant authorities. So what is the rational decision for me to make? The rational decision is for me not to tell you. Even if by me telling you, I might be able to get treatment that might help lower that compulsion. And it's half the time like, I never thought of that. Right? So by the same way, the most rational thing for you to do, unless you have a child who's particularly sick and they're going to test them anyway, but why would you go out of your way to test it? Why'd you go out of the way to test? Because if you test positive, that's going to be reported to the state and you're going to get letters and stuff. So why bother test? I've never had a COVID test for exactly this reason, because I read HIPAA, right? I've never had a COVID test. I will never have a COVID test if I can avoid it. Because if I don't know, I can't be compelled to report something I don't know, right? Have you ever been diagnosed with COVID? Nope. Have you ever been exposed to COVID? No. No, I don't know. So me saying no is a truthful answer. So it incentivizes ignorance, which is kind of dumb. They're incentivizing dumbness. As long as I don't have the test, I don't have to ever say that I was COVID positive, because what do I know? So the whole thing disincentivizes getting the test in the first place. Because as I just informed you throughout this video, if you get the test and it tests positive, that's not protected information. You can't go to your doctor. You literally can't go to your doctor and get a COVID test that's going to be confidential. Doesn't exist. I suppose that the answer is no, it's confidential. But what do you care? Another $100 from Kathy Carver. Thank you very much, Kathy. Right? So it's literally impossible to go to your doctor or any medical professional and get a COVID test that's confidential. Doesn't exist. Doctor-patient confidentiality? HIPAA? Nope. So what's your incentives? Your incentives are to never get the test, because if you never get the test, then you never had COVID. Now, did you? Right? So that, And it's the same problem with mental health. It's like, if you have a desire to do something, why would you ever tell anybody? Because the only thing they can do is interfere with you, and they can't help you. So the whole thing seems a little backwards to me. I think TerraSoft is a bit of a broken decision because it incentivizes ignorance. It requires a therapist to tell someone something when they might be able to relieve the danger by counseling. And at least the person's trying to get help, which is slightly better. So, yeah. So now you've moved in a situation where before TerraSoft, someone who had a desire would go to the therapist and try to get it treated. Now they're disincentivized from getting treatment because they know that if they say the wrong thing, they're going to get reported. So why even bother risking it? So the whole thing is a little bit dumb for me. It's a little bit dumb. So, yeah. So what about a priest? I don't believe priests are mandatory reporters. Nor are, well, I don't know. I'd have to double check. Mandatory reporters are determined by state law. And at least when it comes to past offenses, I don't have to tell anyone as a lawyer. So just don't tell me you're ever planning on doing it in the future. So if you come to me and be like, hey, I committed these horrible, horrible crimes in the past, if you tell a doctor that, they might have to report you. But a lawyer doesn't, because, I have to give you legal advice about the past. Yeah, Ken's Counseling Couch says there's certain things I hate about mandatory reporting as a therapist myself, right? Yeah, Ken. It literally disincentivizes having free and open conversations. One time I commented this to a therapist, and they're like, the very fact you're having this conversation with me means I should report you. Which is like, well, that's a pretty strong disincentive never to discuss it ever again with you, but thanks. Guess we'll never talk again. So, priests are for child abuse? They might be. I don't know. It's going to be a state-specific thing. Mandatory reporters are determined by state law. So you're going to have to check your state law on that one. So, yeah. So we are trying to cross the 50,000 mark on our subscriber count. So if you have not subscribed already, please subscribe. We, according to Social Blade, are at 49.9. And we're trying to get to 50,000 tonight. So if you would like to subscribe and get us over the 50,000 mark so we can celebrate, I would really appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, Ken's Counseling Couch says, I'm required to report any threats of harm to self or others, any child abuse allegations at all, and elder abuse in my state. That's very, very typical, Ken. Yeah, that's very, very typical. So you tell me, Ken. I'm a rational person. I actually read the patient notice that you're required to give me, incidentally, which tells me explicitly you're going to do this. So assuming I didn't know before walking into your door, if I'm a rational person and actually read the mandatory notice you're required to tell me, which tells me explicitly that if this happens, you're going to breach my confidence, what's my incentive to talk to you about my problems? Because I literally can't. So that should definitely make me safer, right? So all kinds of, it's just a very weird system in my mind. I don't think it makes much sense. Yeah. But I always tell clients, yeah. And then Ken says, I always tell clients, if you say you're feeling whatever, but don't want to hurt yourself, that's not enough to report. But if you have the means, intent, and plan, then yes. Well, yeah, Ken. But the problem is for me, like, if I'm giving advice to myself, what is the most conservative advice? Like, I don't know exactly where that line is for you. I mean, you've given me some benchmarks, which is nice, I suppose. But you've given me some benchmarks about what you might or might not do, but I don't know for sure. Right? If I'm giving my advice, like if I'm a rational person and if I want to protect my autonomy as my most important value, if autonomy is my most important value, which I think is a reasonable value to have as a principal value, if autonomy is my principal value and I don't want anyone interfering with my autonomy, come hell or high water, because my individual liberty is that important to me, my individual autonomy and my individual liberty is more important to me than my physical health, more important to me than my mental health, which I think would be hard to deny as a rational position. Give me liberty or give me death is a rational position, I think. So if I say my autonomy is more important than my mental health and my physical health, my individuality is more important than my mental health my physical health. My own independence is more important than my mental health and my physical health. And I'm a rational person with those priorities. And I come to you and you say to me, well, if you do this, I'll report you. But if you do this lesser thing, I won't report you. The most conservative thing for me to do is not even get close to the line. If that's truly my maximum value, the most conservative thing for me to do is just not talk about it at all. Because then I don't have to worry about it. If I don't talk about it at all, then I don't even have to worry about, well, I'm on the path to maybe I'll say something accidentally. Oh my God, I might say something when I'm not really thinking, right? I might get on a roll and say things. I might say something, oh my God, I crossed the line. And it's too late, right? So being a good lawyer to myself, when they tell you you have the right to remain silent, right? So the most conservative advice I can give you is just don't talk about it at all. So now we're inhibited from having a discussion which will actually help me feel better or help me get better. This is just really, really positive for everyone involved, Ken. And I feel your frustration as much as mine, because this is, I just don't think it's, I don't think it's irrational to think that your autonomy, your individuality, your independence, your own sovereignty over yourself is more important than mental health. It's like, I'd rather be insane and free, I think is a reasonable position. In fact, there's a nice little line there from the U.S. Supreme Court dealing with the death penalty on kind of this issue, which is that the importance of someone's ability to maintain their own innocence, even though that they might face death. And there's a nice little line from a Supreme Court case along these lines where the Supreme Court writes that, we can't determine which is more important. It might be more important for someone to be able to I think it dealt specifically with the context of forcing someone a pardon on someone, I think is where it came up. And saying, can the president force a pardon on somebody? And there's this idea, which I don't really think is quite right personally, but the Supreme Court apparently does, so what do I know? There's this idea that accepting the pardon means you're accepting the guilt of it, which I don't quite buy, but or at least it's the perception of it, which is closer. So that's where it came up, is like, can the president force a pardon on you? And of course, if it's the president, because it's the U.S. Supreme Court and they only deal with federal law. And so it's like, can the president force a pardon on you? And they say, well, there's at least the perception that by accepting the pardon, you are admitting guilt. And maybe there's a reality that you're admitting guilt as well. And there's a nice little line there that's from the Supreme Court saying, basically, a person has to have the right to refuse a pardon, even if it's a pardon on a capital crime, because it might be more important to someone to, with their last dying breath, say, I did not commit this crime, rather than have the forced agreement of them saying they committed the crime. So even though all I have to do essentially is say I did it, and I get off scot-free, and I won't be executed, the Supreme Court has a nice little line there about, like, it might be more important for someone to, with their last dying breath, say, no, I didn't do it, even though it means their own death. And so that's one of the things I think about sometimes about the importance of these various things. The president cannot pardon state charges. That's why it only comes up in the case of federal issues. So yeah. It's a nice little, this is the idea that you have the right to refuse a pardon, because the Supreme Court, they actually wrote a line, and I think it's a mistake, but it's a mistake the Supreme Court wrote. I think it's dicta, but nevertheless, they wrote it that accepting the pardon means accepting the underlying guilt, which I don't quite believe. The perception is much more reasonable, and like, you have the ability to refuse the pardon, even if it would mean you're not being executed, because you have the right to refuse the Scarlet A, the acceptance of the Scarlet A, even though you're going to die. So there's something in there somewhere about autonomy, the importance of autonomy, individuality, personal freedom being more important than mental health and physical health. And that isn't to say that someone couldn't make a different choice. I'm not saying this is the only rational choice, because I'm not that dumb either. I'm saying this is a rational choice. I think I've said that throughout. Right? This is a rational choice a person could make. Here is a reason that you could make it. Here is some citations that make that idea. And here's something Patrick Henry said once. That's how it goes along the same line. But you could hold other values as more important. You could hold life itself as more important. You could hold mental health more important, or physical health more important, or any number of other values more important. So it isn't to say that it's the only rational maximum value. It's just to simply say it's a rational maximum value. And if you have that rational maximum value, which I kind of do for myself, to be honest, it discourages fuller exploration of mental health issues, which, as people who follow me on this channel know, is there are issues I deal with. And so I personally feel constricted in my ability to talk to mental health professionals. That's how much fun I'm having with all this stuff. Because I know too much. I know about Tarasoff versus Regents. I read it. I know about HIPAA. I read it. I read the damn statute. I know about the patient privacy protections. I read it, right? So I know too damn much. So yeah, it inhibits my own ability to potentially get treatment because I'm so concerned about what might be an outlier possibility. I don't even want to risk going down the road. So how much fun are we having there? All the fun. Anyways, yeah. I don't know if the president's ever tried to pardon state level charges. I believe the way it's phrased, though, it does speak to the federal constitution, but I think the phrasing, the way it's phrased, yeah. I was trying to buy time and see if we got to 50,000 before I signed off, but it doesn't look like we're quite going to make it. Apparently now I'm at 49.8. Apparently I lost subscribers along the way. Well, now 49.9. Let's see where I'm sitting at the moment before I sign off. $49,926. We're not going to clear it in the next 5 minutes. Oh well. Maybe we'll clear it tonight during our stream. So we're going to have a stream tonight where we're going to have a Supreme Court React. It's dealing with a church group that wanted to fly the Christian flag at Boston's town hall and was denied permission. So we're going to listen to that oral argument and deal with the ability of the town of Boston and other governments to restrict the flying of flags by private individuals based on, whatever criteria they're basing it on. So we're going to do that, all that good stuff. So I'm going to sign off for now. If you've enjoyed this stream, please remember to subscribe. I need the additional 80 people to get to the 50,000 number. Please remember to check us out later. Please hit the join button to become a person on screen where you get your name on stream like you were seeing earlier. It's another benefit we're offering to people. So when we do the partial thing view, you get your name on stream. It's kind of nice. And remember to do all the YouTubey things. I'm off for now. Until later, my friends, I hope all is well. Cheers. Well, before I sign off, I really should do the super chats because I think there might have been a super chat I missed. So let me do that before I sign off because I try to always hit them before I sign off. $4.99 from Andy the Game Maker. Thanks for coming on my podcast, Kurt. $9.99 from the Visitor Snafu. Near Whitehall, Route 22 has been under construction for 25 years due to corruption. This doesn't surprise me. That state is stuck in the 80s due to its government. $100 from Kathy. Thank you very much. $9.99 from Stephen Light. Thanks for bringing this to this, Kurt. You're welcome. $20 from Stephen C. Always appreciate your brains on other channels. Light speed is constant. $100 from Kathy Carver. Thank you again for that generous support. It is very appreciated. $10 from Ricardo Ospina. A priest should not be a mandatory reporter since there's a separation of church and state in the Catholic religion. They cannot reveal what's told in confession. And $50 from the Denialist, which is also a very generous super chat contribution. Thank you. Just got my new job full-time and it comes with a pay raise. So have some money to the tech lawyer. Well, thank you very much, the Denialist. Congratulations on your new job, and I hope it's everything that you hope it will ever be. So I hope all is well. Until later, my friends, cheers and goodbye.